This first question is from a woman who writes, my girlfriend and I have been friends for 20 years. We met at college and spent a lot of time together. Then about 10 years ago, she got married and has had 2 children, a daughter and a son. Her son, the oldest, has a mild form of autism and requires a lot of special care. My problem is that she never has time for me anymore. When I bought my house, she gave me a gift saying, considering that I will never see your place. So you can hear, if you read it over and over, I can hear in the words you've chosen that you've taken this personally, that she doesn't, well, you said it pretty clearly, she doesn't have time for me anymore. You made it about you. What would be the single thing that you could do that would change your life more than anything else? So you're a single person, you can do anything you want to do. And what single thing would change? Putting you on a boat in the middle of the ocean? No. Let's see. Going to a country where you don't speak the language? No. Setting fire to your house? No, that can be replaced. Getting married? Closer, but partners like go to work, they get in the car, they go somewhere else, they sleep all night long. No, the winning answer is have a child. It would be like going to a pet store and saying, I would like to buy an unusually troublesome cow. And this cow will follow me everywhere I go and will sleep in the bed with me and kick the door down if I don't open the door, and moo and scream if I'm not in the same room, and will break everything in the house. That's how much change can happen when you have just one child. This woman has 2. I know a woman, very bright, brilliant mind, very capable, and had literally thought to herself and said out loud, I think there's almost nothing I can't do if I put my mind to it. And then she had a child. And I think the child was, 6 months old when she called me one night and she said, is it illegal to throw your child out the 2nd story window? Yes, dear, it turns out it is illegal. I said, actually, it depends on whether the child is injured. Children require a great deal of time, energy, focus, everything you've got. Having 2 children isn't 10% harder than having 1. It's way more trouble. And she has a child who, in your own words, has a form of autism and requires a, quote, lot of special care. This means special schools, special teachers, special conferences with the occupational therapists and with the advocates and with the principal and with the school system and and it goes on and on and on. It's not uncommon for children with special needs that they can't even be left with somebody other than the parent, because you simply can't train a babysitter to be prepared for all the things a special needs child requires. So this woman's life is completely different, to the point where she says, here's a housewarming gift, but I'll probably never see your place. You think that she's disrespecting or disregarding you? This woman's life has been completely taken over and consumed by having these 2 kids. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying she thinks that's a bad thing. I'm saying you're not speaking here with an understanding of what it involves. You say, we live only an hour apart, and she doesn't want to come to visit. Notice your choice of words. Notice you say that she doesn't want to come to visit. She would probably love to stick both of her kids separately in a safe, the kind of safe that you lock up to put money in so that they can't get into any trouble, drill a little hole for air, and come and visit you several times a day to get a break. It's not about her not wanting to come to visit, it's that she can't. You continue, because she doesn't want to bring him and disturb our time together. In the case of some children, special needs or not, two children, disturb our time together is an understatement. I've met small children who could destroy small countries. So yeah, I'll bet she doesn't want to bring them, because you wouldn't end up spending any time together at all. And if she's a typical parent and doesn't know how to love and teach her children, then they would be wild and crazy, and she wouldn't be able to even look at you the whole time that she was with you. You continue. She doesn't want to be gone from him for that long, leaving him with somebody else. So for us to get together, I usually drive to see her, and I do this maybe 2 or 3 times a year. It bugs me that I always have to make the effort to go see her. Why can't she come to see me? And I just answered that question. She's utterly overwhelmed by having these two kids. Whether it has much to do with the one child that has special needs, I have no idea. It may be her complete incompetence as a parent that she can't stop her children from doing destructive things. I've watched kids who wouldn't qualify as special needs at all just pretty much destroy any portion of a store that they're in, for example. And the parent is right there literally begging the child to stop begging. An 8-year-old child to stop knocking all the items off the shelf onto the floor where the glass items break. No kidding. So I don't know why it is that she doesn't want to travel with the kids, or she probably even finds it difficult for people to come over and visit her when the kids are there. But she finds it impossible. That's the point. It's her and the kids. It has nothing to do with her and you. Circumstances change. And almost never do we like change. You still see the old days in your girlfriend. When you see her, you picture when you knew her in college. No cares, no responsibility, nothing. Like I said, the one thing you could do most to change your life is to have a child. The one thing that you could do to have the least responsibility on earth is to go to college for most kids. I mean, they go from going to school for 8 hours a day and discovering they get there as freshmen unless they've been previously informed. I wasn't. And I got my class schedule. And when I got done, an advisor said, "Are you sure you want to take this many classes?" Apparently I'd taken, 30% more classes than most kids. And I'm looking at a schedule that is, not even half a day long. Turns out they expect you to study in between the classes. But most kids discover in college that, wow, they have more free time than they'd ever even dreamed of, even on vacation. So you knew her back in those days when there were no responsibilities. But things really have changed. Things always do. When I was young, my parents used to come here to Georgia to visit from where they lived, like 1,500 miles away. And when they hit about 65, in other words, my age now, they quit visiting. And I did all the visiting and pretty much all the calling. They just decided in their minds, and they're the only ones that get to make this decision. Yeah, we're old now, and so it's other people's job to go out of their way. Sounds reasonable to me. They're 90-something now, and it's really obvious that other people need to go out of their way, because for them to travel and go somewhere is quite a chore. They decided that quite a few years ago, and they get to make that decision. I used to have a friend who was like this. He never called. He never visited. It wasn't about his kids because he completely ignored them. He always expected me to. Always did. Bottom line, Things are the way they are. Whether they changed to get that way or they were always that way. And then we choose what we will do. But complaining about the way things are isn't one of the steps. Whining is never a step. And do your best not to be offended by the word whining. But that's what you're doing here. You're whining that your friend doesn't act as carefree as she used to in college when she had no responsibility, now that she has 2 kids. Well, gee, no wonder. We choose how we'll respond to change. But the change will happen. So, I visit my parents because they don't come here. I call them because on the whole they don't call here. I used to see my friend much more than I do now. I don't have as much time, much like your friend. And you choose how much you want to see your friend, not how much you're supposed to see your friend, not how much you see your friend compared to how you saw your friend in the past. No, you get to choose freely. You're not being inconvenienced here in any way because you get to choose how much time you want to spend with her, knowing that you're going to have to drive an hour to see her. You might think that's unfair, but it's not. It's just unequal, and that's not the same thing. I'm going to say that again because if you said that to yourself, you and everybody listening, all day long, you'd benefit from it. It might be unequal, but that doesn't make it unfair. They're not the same thing. Your friend has 2 time-consuming children, both of them, one of them autistic, and you might discover that your house would be demolished if they came over. Donna and I often visited our kids over the years simply because it was, as opposed to their coming here, easier and neater. No kidding, we still do it. We used to always have them come over here, and the house was packed, and it was noisy, and it was fun. And now we go to visit each of them in the place where they live and where the kids are used to it and where they have their own beds and where we stay in a hotel. And it's unbelievably easier. Now, I could complain. They never come here. They never come here and get a hotel and make things easier for me. I could complain about that, but it's silly. I'm the one that gets to make the choice. So you evaluate the costs and you choose. But complaining about circumstances never, ever helps you make the decisions and never makes the relationship better. When it rains, to make a metaphor, when it rains, it just rains. It doesn't rain to you. It doesn't rain personally on you. When it rains, you just make a decision. Am I going to go out or not? If I go out, am I going to wear a coat or not? Am I going to wear an umbrella or not? Am I going to drive the car or walk? Circumstances change, people change, and then you make your choices. You can only have the power to do that without being annoyed or victimized if you feel sufficiently loved and loving. If you don't feel sufficiently loved, you'll feel inconvenienced by your friend. And that just doesn't make any sense because it doesn't do any good. Making it worse, you continue, is the fact that when I do go to see her, we usually spend the whole time doing her errands and chores like shopping, taxiing kids around, cleaning, whatever. Sometimes she'll even answer the phone while I'm there and talk for 15 minutes instead of telling them that I'm there. So her life circumstances have changed so much that who she is, how she can pay attention to one person, how she responds to pressure, how she responds to her friend driving an hour to see her has changed. And it's affected both of you. So now, with a loving heart, you decide whether you still even want that relationship at all. With her dragging you around doing chores when you come over to visit, with her answering the phone and chatting with another friend while you're right there in the room. I have a really hard time imagining ever doing that to somebody, but your friend doesn't. She's the way she is. So how often do you want to do that? As it is, because you're not going to change her. All of this isn't about a friend from college who had 2 kids. This applies to all of us as circumstances and things change literally minute by minute during the day. Things are going to be different. So now what do you choose to do? One of the steps isn't, I don't like it. It doesn't help. Really, one of the steps isn't to whine about it or complain about it. You're not going to change your friend. I have done this more times than I can count. This, what I'm about to describe. Some old friends with whom I developed a relationship back when I was a different person, back when things were different with me, back when I didn't know what I know now, back when they didn't know what they know now or haven't changed in the ways that they have. Some old friends just aren't enjoyable anymore. So I don't see them at all. Because I hate them? No. Because I'm offended by them, because they've changed? No. They're just not enjoyable anymore. The other day, Dawn is really kind of freakish about having fresh milk. I mean, like, wow. She examines the expiration date on every container of milk, then opens it up, and then blows in the top of it and sits there and smell tests it like you would a bottle of wine. I mean, the milk has to be fresh. And so there have been times when she's been like gone, or I will hide a bottle of milk because I think it's a little silly to not drink milk if it doesn't taste bad when you reach the expiration date. So one day I took the top off this milk and just swung that up to drink out of the, opening of the milk, which of course would, please don't anybody tell my mother that I did this. And I got a great big, I would even call it a swig. I'd call it a chunk of milk that had gone so bad that it was solid. Well, circumstances had changed. When I bought the milk, it wasn't like that. It was fresh. It was perfect to drink by itself, pour on milk, whatever. Things had significantly changed. Now I would have to choose whether to eat it with a spoon. Things are as they are. I decided not to drink the milk. And that's the only choice we ever get as things change. I don't get to choose that milk gets old and stale, and if you wait long enough, goes bad and then curdles and then turns into a solid chunk of concrete. I don't get to choose that, but I do get to choose what to do as it goes through those changes. I see my parents regularly because I go out and see them. I see my children less often now than when they lived at home because they're scattered all over the country. Stuff changes, and then you choose. You say, it seems like everything else is more important to her now. Maybe not everything, but a whole lot of things are more important to her now than you, as clearly proven by the fact that she puts her children before you, which seems somewhat appropriate, that she puts phone calls that she gets. She can look right there on the phone and see that it's not likely not to be an emergency from an old friend that she knew long ago. She puts that more important than visiting with you. So, yeah, maybe not everything is more important to her now than you, but a whole lot of things are. It's just not like it was in college when there was just the two of you and you were each other's BFF and all you ever did was stuff together. Now she has a lot more demands on her time. So now you choose. Things have changed. We've accepted that. We got that. We've nailed that one. I've probably talked it to death. Now you choose to accept her as she is. Then what choice do you have? The only other choice is to whine and complain about her all the time, which just doesn't make sense. Let's live with it and hate it. So accept her as she is. Then you decide how much time you will spend driving to her house and then spending time with her while the kids are there, while you're shopping, while she's doing errands, and while she's talking to people on the phone. You may decide that now you're going to see her once a year. You may decide that you're not going to see her at all. Any of those decisions is acceptable. After all, she already said to you, since I'm never going to see your house. It's not complicated. But there's nothing to feel bad about. We find new friends. We change the circumstances in our own lives, and other people's relationships to us change too. Choose. Heather was, this is from a real life event. Heather was talking to her husband, Adam, and she said, I feel like we don't do anything together. But I do lots of stuff with you, Adam said. And he began to name some activities that they had shared in recent days and weeks. Now, I was in the room as they had this conversation, so I'm not guessing at the content. And Adam turned to me as he said, this happens all the time. She says stuff that just isn't true, and then I'm supposed to fix it. So how could two people both be present? We've all done this. Everybody listening to me has done this, participated in conversations like this. How could two people both be present for the same event, but have diametrically opposed accounts of that event? The answer is important because these arguments happen every day and everywhere. Is one person drunk every time these two people get together? Is one of them brain damaged? Is one of them not present? Nope, it's simpler than that. I asked David, what is the subject of this conversation? Heather spoke first, so she set the subject. That's the rule. Really, it's a law. It's the only thing that could possibly work. They use it in courtrooms. They use it on the roadways. She spoke first, so she owns the subject. Nobody was speaking, and she spoke. She's the speaker. She spoke only one sentence, and then you responded. So let's start with the subject, because if you don't know the subject of the conversation that just began, you're going to be screwed. When Heather spoke, what was she talking about? And David said, well, she said, we don't do anything together. So you're saying the subject was the stuff you do together? I was asking. He said, yes. He was pretty proud of himself because he'd listened. And I said, no. In fact, that wasn't the subject at all. Well, he looked like he'd been hit with a shovel. Then I don't get it, because he'd repeated her words almost exactly and he'd missed the subject. He said, I'm lost. And I said, you are lost. Imagine that I punch you in the face. What is the subject of my interaction with you? Is it my fist? Is it your face? And you could see the light bulb go on in his head. He said, no. You're telling me that you're angry with me. I said, exactly. My fist is just a demonstration of the real subject, which is my anger. And a similar thing happened with Heather. When she said, you don't do stuff together, that was just a demonstration of the real subject. She was really saying this. It would have been more helpful if she'd actually used these words, but she didn't know how to. She was saying, Adam, I am not feeling as close to you as I used to, and I want to feel more important to you. I want to feel more loved. And he looked at me. I think I've already in this conversation called him David once and Adam the second time. It's going to be interesting to see what I call him for the rest of this. Sometimes as I change people's names, I forget that I've changed them, so I change them again. So when I told him what she really said, he said, you're kidding. Nope. In case you haven't noticed, since I've been speaking the last few sentences, Heather hasn't stopped nodding her head. That's exactly what she meant to say. And even though she didn't state it very clearly, that was the subject of the conversation. Heather was still nodding, yes, that's right. And he said, wow. I said, and then you answered with how you've been doing things with her instead of answering her need to feel more loved. You didn't mean to, but you changed the subject from her not feeling loved to how you have been doing things with her. Now, the subjects sound related, but it's still a pretty big change. He said, so how should I have responded? Now, that's actually pretty sweet of you to ask, I suggested. I went over to Heather, held both her hands, kissed her forehead. Looking into her eyes, I said, Heather, I've been neglecting you and not telling you how much I love you. With words and with my behavior, what would you like most from me right now? Now, I didn't say it, but what I was doing was when he said, how should I have responded? I was responding to Heather exactly as I was suggesting he might have responded to her. What did she do? She cried. She just sat there and cried. That was exactly what she wanted him to say. He would have had no clue because he didn't even know the dang subject of the conversation. We don't realize how often we change the subject when somebody speaks. We have no clue. I've watched people talk and watched the subject change so fast, it's like watching a tennis ball go back and forth over the net, each hit being a change of subject. We could do a much better job of paying attention to the underlying message. One day I was in a group of 4 people when Margaret, who rarely speak, we've changed people now. We've changed from the couple we were talking about and completely changed the scene. So I was in a group of 4 people when Margaret, who rarely speaks in groups, much more, to make it brief, shy and withdrawn. She said, have you seen the pilot show for the new television series blank? I can't remember what it was. Somebody else in the group instantly began describing the pilot show. Now, only because I knew the person who was describing the pilot show, I would not do this with a stranger who would probably have become incensed. I reached over and I touched the arm of the person who had interrupted, and I turned to Margaret and I said, I haven't seen that series. Would you tell me about it? What happened here? The subject, as spoken by Margaret, who introduced it, was this: I almost always feel awkward in groups of people. I never know what to say. Who in the world would have guessed that was the subject? But it was, because that's who Margaret is. But I'm going to give it my best shot with a subject that I do know something about, a television series. Now, the interrupter, who is describing the pilot, thought he was being asked to describe the television show because he knows everything about everything. So he unwittingly changed the subject, and had he continued, he would have contributed to Margaret feeling even more socially incompetent, which is why she rarely speaks in groups. See how this happens? She speaks. Here's the subject. The second person who hears one word that they like joins in, and from that one word, jumps off to where they want to go, leaving Margaret behind in the dust going, well, I was just completely ignored. We do this to each other every day. It's not just words we need to listen to. We need to listen to people and to the feelings that they are expressing with their words. Even if they're not doing it with great skill, they often aren't. That's why you really have to listen to them. In fact, most of the time, if I say, what's the subject of the conversation to the person who starts it, they don't know the subject of the conversation either. So the speaker doesn't know, the listener doesn't know. Yeah, I'd call that terminally dead. Actually, that's a little redundant, unless, of course, we have bringing back the dead. So if we listen in this way, if we listen in a way where we listen to people, we won't change the subject and become entangled in conflicts or perpetrate the act of making people feel ignored and small. Can you imagine how much the world would change? Ariel Sharon was the prime minister of Israel for years and years, and he'd been there through the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He was a young man who used to set off bombs and blow up Palestinian villages, and he became the prime minister and participated in who knows how many peace talks. He was the first prime minister to unilaterally, not as a trade, give communities, kibbutzes, area, territory, land to the Palestinians free. He used to just say, we'll just give this to you, which of course enraged his people. Pretty much if you take any action that has any meaning, you're going to enrage somebody. So what I'm telling you is he's a real authority on the subject of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he said, nobody understands what this conflict's about. It's not about religion. It's not about land. It's not about possession. It's not about cultures. It's not about language. It's not about any of that stuff anymore. It's about two people who have forgotten how to love each other and listen to each other as people, as opposed to fighting over issues. If I'm fighting over an issue with a computer, well, there's just no problem at all. We can just resolve the issue. If I know enough about the computer, I can reprogram it. I can write code. I can solve an issue with the computer. If I'm dealing with a person, I'm listening to a human being, and that changes everything. Or could. New subject. A woman writes and says, I met Robert online several months ago. We really hit it off. For a month, he called me every day. And then she described the usual, romantic stuff. And, when I talk to him on the phone, the birds sing and the orchids bloom and blah, 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 blah. She was clearly in love. Lots of activities, but she was still somewhat protective of herself, and he wasn't opening up about anything. So she writes, after 6 weeks, we had the let's just be friends talk. It was very confusing. We'd feel close, then not. We agreed to date other people, but then he was jealous if I saw anybody. She blamed herself for sometimes not being unconditionally loving, and then blamed him for not being open and honest. What a mess. It went on and on for 2 pages. Now, I didn't intend to bring this subject in again, but sometimes a subject is so important that I'll use it repeatedly during a video chat. I can promise you that as these two talked, they changed the subject with each other thousands of times. Why? Because they'd feel close when they were being listened to, and then they wouldn't, because somebody would say something and the other person would change the subject, and then the first person would feel like they were being discounted and disrespected, and then they'd say something to get back the ownership of starting the conversation, and then that would fail because the other person had already veered off in some wild and crazy direction. We do this all day long. How do relationships ever start? How do they continue? How do they endure? Well, people are changing the subject all the time because we forget that the subject, when somebody else speaks, is them. They're the subject. The words they're using may be about whatever, taking a trip or doing a thing, but the subject is them. And it really takes paying attention to know that and to learn how to listen to somebody else. There's another lesson here. And this is to the person who wrote. You're not really ready to date anybody. This guy, Robert, is just a sign of that. And remember, in the beginning, it was all roses and the birds sang and the orchids bloomed. And he's just a sign of the fact that you're not ready to be in a relationship. And the details, the pages of them don't matter. It's way faster to learn how to date if you read the dating book together. I say this to every couple who calls me and says, we started dating and it started off great and now it's going downhill. Now, these are very often people in real love. And I say, so did you start off with the dating book? Well, no, we were really having a great time and now you're not. So if you look at the dating book, the first thing it says is don't ever date somebody without reading this book. It's kind of like what I do sometimes with equipment. I get the equipment, I take a look at it, I'm so excited to use it that I rip the cover off of it, I start moving levers and start trying to do things, and there's a little manual to the side, and the first thing it says in the front of the manual is, don't do anything until you've read this manual. Which I do notice after I've screwed things up bad enough that it doesn't operate at all. Same thing with dating. We need the information that's found in the dating book. That gives us additional choices. That's the teaching part. And we need to feel loved enough to be in a relationship with another, what have we been talking about as we've been talking about changing the subject, with another person who needs to be listened to and cared for. And if we don't know how to do that, it really doesn't matter how much fun we had when we both, on the spur of the moment, flew off to Fiji and lived in a hut out over the surf for 5 days. Who can't have fun doing that? We need more than that to sustain a relationship. Spend more time on the website, listen to video chats, participate in the conference calls, learn how to make one-on-one calls. But dating, you're a long way from learning how to date, because dating has all these expectations involved in it. You need to first learn how to have loving relationships with people with whom you don't have these strikingly elevated expectations. Dating is expectation city. Humans have a strong tendency to believe that if they want something badly enough, they can make it happen. You see it on commercials. I can't remember which company it is. I think it's Nike. I'm not sure. But at the end of the commercial, it just says, just do it. In other words, if you put your mind to it, if you get out there and you exercise hard enough and you do enough training, and especially if you wear Nike shoes, then you can do it. Well, I've discovered that if I'm digging a hole in my backyard, that's pretty much true. At one point, I got to a place when I was digging a hole in my backyard where I hit bedrock, solid slate, and I went, just do it. So I brought out a blasting engineer and discovered that with dynamite, you can make a hole just about as deep as you want. So it might work with digging a hole, working harder and just making things happen, but it doesn't work that way with people. You can't make them into what you want. It doesn't work with relationships. It didn't work with the lady who was talking about her friend from college where the relationship has changed. She couldn't just make it like it used to be. We can't make choices for other people. We can only make choices for how we will change and what we will do. New subject. This person says, my partner of 11 years has just announced that she wants to quit taking her antidepressant and her anti-anxiety medication. She's been depressed and been taking these medications for a very long time, and it has made life bearable. Now, obviously, she has to make her own decisions, you continue, but every time she goes off her medications, it gets very ugly, very fast. Outbursts of anger over nothing, anxious, attacking, critical, sits in her room for hours just rocking in the bed, doing nothing. If anybody ever proved that they need their meds, if there was anybody, it's her, because she goes nuts without them. And when she's on them, she becomes actually pretty reasonable. She won't do real love, so forget that. Real love might eliminate her symptoms, and I'm still quoting the writer. But that's not going to happen. So all I have is the meds. And when she gets crazy, sometimes I respond in kind, and then it really gets messy. So what can I do? You always have three choices. Again, things are as they are. She's decided to go off her medications. So what do you choose to do? Live with it and like it, live with it and hate it, leave. Right now, you're kind of hating it. You're not able to live with it and like it. Like it when she's off her meds. Apparently, she becomes relatively insane. You could leave, or it turns out there are other choices, meaning there are choices where you could learn to live with it, the relationship, not necessarily this particular decision that she's making, and learn how to like it. Or you could tell your wife, if you go off the medication, I'm leaving. You have lots of choices. And I'm not even close to telling you which of these you should do, or even if it's any of these. You have to decide what you can live with. And you're the only one who can make that decision. She gets to make her choice. Regrettably, it really affects you. So you get to make a choice where you get to stay sane also. New subject. For years, I contributed all the money to the finances with my husband and myself. And he just sat around and complained that he couldn't get a job. Of course, he didn't really look for a job either. Funny that, how you never find a job if you never leave the house and you never get on the computer and you never send out a resume. And I've discovered that with quite a number of people. Perfect example of victimhood. Complain that things are going badly, but do nothing to change them. Now, I happen to know when people say, I can't get a job, that is utterly not true, because I have counseled, I couldn't even count how many hundred parents of adult children who have finally listened and told their child that they had, pick it, doesn't matter what the time period is, a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is. They had a month to get a job, an apartment, and be out of the house. And the kid waits till the last day. They all do. No kidding. Almost all of them. Waits to the last day and asks for an extension, and when they don't get one, they have a job within 24 hours. So it turns out there are jobs out there. There just aren't jobs out there that require no training, no experience, where you don't have to show up to work, and yet you get benefits and high pay. There are people who are actually looking for these jobs. You continue. Finally, he went to college and got a teaching certificate. This is the woman talking about her husband. But after multiple interviews, he hasn't gotten anything. He doesn't interview well because he's depressed and lacks confidence. I've asked him to get professional help with his resume and interviewing, which are both readily available from professionals whose entire jobs is to do this. But he's done neither one. He's home most of the time. He doesn't help clean the house while I'm at work. He plays video games all day long. And the penny drops. He doesn't want to work, honey. That's what he's telling you. He finally gets an education, but he doesn't interview well. He could learn how to interview better, but he really doesn't want to. He sat around doing absolutely nothing until you pretty much kicked him out of the house so that he could go get an education and get a job. No, he'd rather play video games. And the reasons could be multiple. Not making fun of them. He was never taught to work. He's just frustrated that absolutely nothing in his life has ever produced happiness. I've almost come to believe that there's no such thing as laziness. The people who are described as lazy at some point in their lives really did try. And when nothing made them happy, something clicked in their brain and they just went, I give up then. And they don't ever try again. But no job, and while he's staying home, he doesn't help with the housework while you're out working, yeah, that pretty much proved that he doesn't want to do anything, because the qualifications for doing housework while you're out of the house are not all that high. He plays video games like a teenager. You continue. I don't confront him because he already feels bad. Ooh, he's got you fooled. And I don't want to make it worse. What I want to know is whether I'm helping him or am I enabling him? I wish I could count how many times I've heard this story. If he does nothing, he will feel like nothing. It's just a fact. What are the 3 legs of the stool that produce happiness or that support happiness? Feeling loved, being loving, and the 3rd leg, being responsible. If we're completely irresponsible, there is no way we can feel happy. There's just no way. He has to work because he will feel better about himself. Now, notice, I'm paying attention to him, not your complaint about him. He doesn't have to work so that you won't be mad at him. He doesn't have to work so that you'll have additional income. He has to work because he'll feel better about him. And getting a job is a full-time job. There's so many things he could be doing. He could be getting what you described, the professional help with his resume, or find a friend who does that. He could practice interviewing. For his particular job, if you Google it, you'll find a list of typical interview questions asked of people who have that job. You will find that list. So what does he do? He gets a friend who asks him those questions, a really easy friend. And then he gets a more aggressive friend who asks him those questions so that he learns how to interview. And you don't know what he means when he says to you, I've been out and I've got lots of interviews. I've heard that phrase used by lots of people and then discovered that they've never been out and had a single interview. They just say it to make happy the people who are mad at them for not getting a job. He may be missing all kinds of ways to find a teaching position that you don't know about, because on the whole, teachers can get jobs. Sometimes they don't get exactly the job they want. Sometimes they have to drive a little further than they had really wanted to. But teaching positions are findable. You might have to move. I don't know how movable your job is, but you might have to move so that he can find an area of the country where teachers are in just bad supply. There are places in the country that need teachers so badly, they'll pay their moving expenses to get there. He could upgrade his teaching skills. So, for example, people who teach English have a very difficult time finding jobs, but chemistry and math teachers don't. He's already got his teacher's certificate. If in most states, if you take a certain amount of coursework in whatever subject schools need most, math, chemistry, physics, whatever, then he's already got his certificate. Now he just also has the qualifications in that particular subject, and suddenly, poof, he's in high demand. But see, I'm not hearing any of this happening. Nobody's doing anything to actually help him find a job, including himself. He might need somebody to hold his hand as he does some of these things for the first time. You can search the internet for the most desirable teaching skills so he knows what to upgrade to. The bottom line is, you wondered whether you were helping him or enabling him. You're enabling him. He has to get out there looking for a job. 8 hours a day, whether it's at the computer, whether it's being interviewed, whether it's going to small town school districts, and has to help you at the house. Or this is just going to perpetuate until he pretty much dies of inactivity and a zero sense of self-worth. He'll just become more and more like a vegetable. And the more he does that, the less hireable he becomes. Sometimes, I'm not advocating you do this, sometimes the only way to motivate somebody to get a job is to give them a date I've counseled hundreds of parents to do this with their adult children, and occasionally counseled spouses to do it with their partners. You might have to give him a date by which he has to have a job, and you can't just to save you a little time, you can't say just have a job. You have to say a job that is full-time and has a minimum income of X dollars. Or what he'll do is he'll go out and find a job where he works 2 hours a week and brings home and clears $11 because all you said was job. But you, in order to motivate him, you might have to give him a date by which he has to have the job, what kind of job, or he will have to move out. I'm not telling you to do it, but I've seen some cases where only that will motivate somebody to get a job, just giving you options. Example, by X date, he has to have a job that involves 35 hours per week at a minimum wage at least, or a job with fewer hours but equivalent pay to 35 hours at minimum wage. Why does that flow off my tongue so easily? Because I've said it to the parents of adult children so many times. I've watched people play the I can't find a job card for 20 plus years in their lives without any physical disability and with the qualifications to get a job. At what point do you realize that he is refusing to be your partner? See, you refer to him as your partner. You say, my partner refuses to get a job and refuses to do housework. No, the guy you married who agreed to be your partner, who lives with you and does nothing in the house, doesn't have a job and doesn't help with homework, but he's not really your partner. So you have to decide, are you willing to live, how many times have we talked about this now in this particular video chat? You have to accept things sometimes as they are, and then you choose what you're going to do next. He's made it very clear he's not going to do anything by himself. So what are you going to do to motivate him, or are you going to stay with him? When you got together, I don't remember if you specified if you'd married or not, but you've been together a long time. You agreed to be partners, and yet he's made you feel guilty that he refuses to be one. See how insane this is? And this is what victims do. It's your decision. But a refusal to work on his part is a refusal to be present. It's a refusal to participate. It's a refusal to be a partner. So, yeah, you got a pretty tough job, pretty tough decision to make. As I always suggest, bring to this decision love and understanding. Lovingly tell him that he really must learn how to improve his interview skills. And then when he just goes, yeah, okay, and goes back to his video games, now see, that's not a discussion. He has to, by the end of the day or by the end of the next day, show you how he set up classes with somebody to improve his interview skills, or to do it in the way that I've described in this chat. Take steps so that he will get a meaningful job and will feel better about himself. Or you could just choose to live with a non-partner for the rest of your life. You have so many choices. But the one where you sit around and just go, I really hate it that my supposed partner doesn't have a job, that one will never work for you, and it will never work for him. We'll see you in a week.